A combat controller is a centralized blueprint actor that handles all things combat. It signals when combat starts and ends, spawning and despawning enemies, switching music, activating player components, like the lock-on system I made a few months ago, and moving objects like doors and barriers to prevent the player from escaping, and much, much more. So for this series, I'm going to be going through everything that we can throw into this controller, starting off first with making it an enemy spawner, and starting and ending combat. For this series, I'm using version 5.6 for the combat variant. I've already set that up in the project settings under map and modes to set the combat character as the default class and the combat player controller as our default controller class. I won't get too much into it, but there is a link in the description for my previous review on the combat variant to set this up for your own project if you don't know how. The only thing that we're going to be changing is in our combat enemy actor. Under damage, I'm going to set the max HP to 1. And in the enemy damage and death, I'm going to take the first character movement value and the get an is valid check. Just because when we destroy this, it might give some errors. And then I've already made some changes to the third person character to be able to hide a life bar, move a bit faster like the normal third person variant, and moving the camera further away. We're going to start off by making our actor. I'm just going to put it in the variant blueprints under new folder called combat. And we're going to make blueprint of type actor, and I'm going to call it BP underscore combat controller. So we're going to first set up our enemy spawner. I'm going to add a sphere. Then I'm going to change the scale to 0.5 for each axis. Then we're going to get the hidden in game and make sure that that's checked. And then we're going to turn off collision. Then we're going to get a scene component and attach it to the sphere. Then we're going to duplicate this twice. And attach the scene under each sphere. We're going to be spawning enemies at the location of the scene. When we drag this into our map, we'll be able to see the sphere, and by dragging the sphere, we can more easily see it than an invisible scene component. In our construction script, we're going to make an array. We're going to take each scene that we have and add each one. Then we'll promote the array to a variable, and we'll call it the enemy spawn array. And then we'll add 2 sphere collisions. The first one we'll call the combat threshold. And the other one we'll call the escape threshold. Then we can increase the size of them. We want to make sure that the escape threshold is bigger than the start threshold. Then we can drag it into our map. Then we can select each sphere. move them as needed. And just for troubleshooting here, for each one of our collision spheres, we'll check hidden in game and make sure that it is not checked. That way when we spawn in, we can see where we're going to be spawning and unspawning our enemies. So we're going to start off by making a custom event. And this is going to be our start combat event. Then we'll get a do once. We're also going to have another custom event. And this is going to be to reset our spawn. And connect that to the reset. When we start our combat, we're going to take our spawn array. And get a for each loop. On each one of these iterations, we're going to spawn an enemy. We're going to get a custom event called spawn enemy. We're going to have one input that's going to be the spawn location. And the variable type is going to be a scene component. So get the object reference for that. So then off of our array element, get spawn enemy. Then we're going to take our spawn array, we're going to get the length, and promote that to a variable. And this is going to be our spawn count. Just to keep track of how many enemies are going to be spawned, so then when we defeat this amount of enemies, the combat is going to be over. But off of our spawn enemy, we're going to spawn actor from class. We're going to be using the BP combat enemy. Of course, you can also make your own enemy character. We're going to split the transform. We could connect the transform from the spawn location, but it's going to make the enemies appear slightly larger than they would be otherwise. So we're just going to get the world location and the world rotation. Then we're going to make another variable, and this is going to be our enemy actors array. We can just call it enemy actors. That's going to be of type BP combat enemy. And then change the object type to array. Then we're going to add the spawned enemy into the array. Before we go any further, we're going to spawn this from our combat threshold. So on the component begin overlap, we're first going to check to see if the other actor that's overlapping is the player character, just so then we don't have an NPC or other enemy wandering in and then triggering combat. And we'll call start combat. So now when we cross our inner threshold, it spawns all actors. They can't do anything since we don't have a nav mesh. So off of our spawn enemy, we're going to get the return value. And we're going to bind event on enemy died. And create a new custom event. We'll just call it on enemy death. Get create event off of our bind and select what we just made. Then for each one that dies, we'll get the spawn count and we will decrement it. Then we're going to get a branch to see, is our spawn count equal to 0? If it is, we've cleared combat, so I'm just going to make a Boolean variable called cleared. Then we want to clean up our actors. So we're going to reset combat. So we get a custom event and call it as such. We'll take our enemy actors, then loop through the array. And the reason why we're doing this is because if we do end up clearing it, and this should be checked, sorry. If we do end up clearing this, and we reset combat, we'll have no actors to destroy. We can just clear this array, so then when we overlap with another combat controller that may be in the level, we aren't adding more to the array. So we want to make sure that all values are just removed. However, if we didn't clear combat and the player just ran away, then we want to make sure that they can walk back into the combat zone and re-engage combat. So assuming that they did not defeat all the enemies and fled, we're going to get an isValid check for each array element. And then we'll just destroy the actor, if the actor still exists. Either way, we'll clear the actors array and get a branch. So if this was not cleared, we'll call our reset spawned. For the escape threshold, we'll get the on component end overlap. We're going to copy the branch, do the same thing, check to see if the other actor is our player character, and then we'll call reset combat. So now when we test this out, if we spawn them and we run away, we despawn them, you'll still see the idling text floating around because that's just a debug built into the character. But then we're able to go back in. If we destroyed only one of the actors, then we still respawn everything. And it's not until we defeat all the actors that if we leave and come back, it won't spawn again until the level is reloaded. Alright, this was a simple setup for an enemy spawner, and I'll be getting into AI functionality as well as everything else I mentioned in the intro. If you are subscribed to the Patreon, there is a link to a second part of this where we'll be setting up an aggro meter. So if the player is loitering between the thresholds for too long, they could still cause combat to initiate. The closer the player is to the combat threshold, the quicker that aggro is accumulated. The player won't be out of combat until they lose all that aggro, which decays faster the further they are away from the controller. If that sounds interesting to you, or you want to support what I do, or just have access to Blueprint components ready to drop into your own project, subscribe to the Patreon, the link is in the description. Speaking of which, shoutouts to the pillars of the community, Winterberry Shark, Francesco Poda, and K-Panic, and to everyone else who gives me the motivation to do things. Remember to like this video if you did like the video, and if you've sat through this entire monologue without subscribing, I'm sorry my voice has distracted you, but please don't forget to do that. So, thank you all for watching, and as always, I hope you've been inspired.